MVL for a while, and she's just over here in St. James, Minnesota. So I went through our synods, worker training program, prep school at Northwestern College, and the seminary. And so while I was vicaring, that's where I met my wife in Norfolk, Nebraska. You can tell if somebody's from there because they say Norfolk and not Norfolk, okay? And so I took her away from that after I graduated from the seminary in '88. Was first assigned to rural Darwin, Minnesota, to serve a rural church there, St. Peter Lutheran. I was there for 6 years, and then after that accepted the call to Holy Trinity in New Hope, and so I've been there now for 31 years. So the congregation currently has an infant through grade 8 academy that has about 80 students in the early childhood and about 92 in the K to 8. So a lot of souls that are being able to, we're able to share the gospel with on a daily basis. So we're thankful for that. So I am here today to give you a presentation, also as in my role as the district president, which has taken me not only across the United States here in a few different areas, but also overseas in Africa. Give a little update on some of my experiences there. I've been president of the Minnesota district since 2018, so it's been 8 years already, going on 8 years. And it's been my privilege to be able to serve God's people in that unique role. So what I'd like to do is just start out with a little prayer, and then I'll get into some of my background with world missions and the like. So we'll pray. But dearest Jesus, we thank you for the gift of your word, for the scriptures testify about you from beginning to end. And Lord, you are our hope. You are our peace, because without you, we have a debt of sin that we cannot pay. Without your word, we are left in spiritual darkness, and we cannot understand the truth. And Lord, because of your word which testifies about you, we see that we have hope. We see that you laid down your life as an atoning sacrifice. We see that by your resurrection, you gained the victory over sin, our guilt, and death, and that you've obtained everlasting life for all people, and that it belongs to those who believe in you. We thank you for the gift of faith that you've given us, and we pray that you would bless us as we labor together to share that word of your love, not only locally, but far and wide around the world, so that others may come to know you as Lord and Savior. And on the last day, join us before your throne, where we will see you face to face and sing our praises together to honor you as our Savior forever. In your name we ask it. Amen. All right, so a little bit about some of the experiences I've had working with other cultures. So at Holy Trinity in New Hope, my first experience with other cultures began in 2013 when Keith Free gave me a call from Wells World Missions Office, or Home Missions Office it was, and he mentioned that there was a Hmong man that had desires of training for ministry, and he had connections with our Hmong ministry down in Kansas City. So at that point, then I reached out to him, and we started conversations. His English was very marginal. I struggled to understand him. He struggled to communicate. So it's been a 13-year process that he's been in the Pastoral Studies Institute program. He's in level 4 now. There's a total of 4 levels, and we're hoping that he'll have graduated from that here at the end of the coming school year, around May. We'll see if he can make the timeline to be a part of the assignment work that would happen when we gather at the seminary at the end of that month. So that's been a long process, but what happens with PSI candidates is that they're taught by local pastors in the area. And we do have a local Hmong pastor in the Twin Cities, Pengmua. So he has been doing what I would call the lion's share of the instruction with Alexander Zhong, who is the PSI student. Alexander's been a member of mine. I've handled a lot of teaching courses with him too. But when it comes to the writing courses and the detailed theology, he needs to be able to have courses that are in his native language. because his English vocabulary is limited, and there's some things he says in English that you wouldn't accept theologically, because we as Lutherans wouldn't use those terms. Okay, so it's just because he's limited by his knowledge of English. But in Hmong, he can express and articulate very clearly, Lutheran doctrine, Christian doctrine. Okay, then I had some experiences in 2014 with a man from Liberia. First of all, he wanted to rent our space for a congregation that he was gathering. His name was Matthew Cephas. He was only looking at that initially. He said, well, if you want to sit down and talk doctrine, then we can go from there. And so we did so. He did not have a formal seminary education. It was more of what I would call what our students would receive at Martin Luther College for theology. And so when I took him through our big course and then some of the deeper theology of the Wells, he was just thoroughly impressed by it, and then was interested in becoming a member of the Wells Ministerium. What happened later on, though, is that went sideways. He got connected with Missouri Synod people and ended up taking some courses without even telling me he was doing that from St. Paul, Concordia St. Paul, and got into their vicar program. And so that kind of took things in a different direction. But I had gone back to Liberia with him once, and then that is my first taste of serving in Africa. And then I served with, as you'll see in the presentation, with, why am I gapping out his name? It'll come to me. But I served again with one of the One Africa team members who was there, and partnered with him in Liberia. And then just a couple of years ago, I went to Tanzania. They say Tanzania, with Ben Foxen. So what you see up here on the screen is where we currently have world mission activity taking place on the continent of Africa. Now, some of these are going to be, as you will see, places where there are Lutheran church bodies that we're in fellowship with. Okay, others where we're exploring relationships, potential relationships with church bodies who have an interest in becoming Lutheran. See if I can get this to work. I think does this switch off on its own if you don't use it? Oh, there it goes, it buzzed. There we go, yep. So what I wanted to do is just ask you, when you hear of world mission work, what comes to mind for you? How do you visualize that? How do you picture it? Many people think of missionaries going out into the local communities, the local villages, and have a picture like this where people are gathered around and they're sharing the message of Christ directly with the local population. And that's really how our Wells missions started in Malawi and Zambia years ago. Ernst Wendland and others went to initiate our world missions program for the Wells in Africa and those countries. And so that was the early model. But things have shifted now so that this is what you're going to see for world missions. Rather than trying to get into the local communities to share Christ, we're working with leaders of Christian churches that already exist. Why do you think that is the direction we've gone? Yes. Okay, language. For example, in Liberia, English is the official language, but there are 19 different dialects there. And there's 5.4 million people that are citizens in Liberia. So to try to cover that wide variety of dialects is going to be problematic, right? And even the English that is spoken by many of the people from further out from Monrovia is what they call Pidgin English. So when I did some teaching, they could make out what I was saying. I couldn't make out what they were saying back to me. Okay, so that's a challenge. Any other reasons? Yes? Culture. Yeah. They don't know us. We don't know them, right? So there's a little bit of unfamiliarity and maybe uncomfortableness that would come from a foreigner interacting with the locals. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Teach 10 people in a class like this, and they're going to go out to 10 different communities and reach the whole lot.
Right. So when we were following that model, and you have to start with when there aren't any other Christians there, right? But then they become dependent on you to do all the ministry. And what we want to do is equip them to go out into their local communities and into their churches that already exist, okay, once, and God willing, fellowship gets established, then to take the truth of the gospel to those local communities, right, where they are known, where they are trusted, where they understand the culture. Because there are things that they face in those cultures that you and I really wouldn't dream of. For example, polygamy. So let's say someone who is a practicing polygamist is brought to faith in Jesus Christ. And you teach him, well, one man, one woman. Well, I've got 4 wives. I've got children from 4 wives. And they're all my dependents. Now what do I do? Do you divorce 3? Kick them out on the street? Or say, divorce 3 and now you're, well, I'll provide for you, but you're going to live in separate houses. Okay, then you have these women now who don't have a spouse, technically, right? So and then what do their relatives think and say? It becomes just a messy, messy thing, okay? And so for you and me to try to approach them and address it from our culture is going to be a challenge. I think now we'll give advice and some counsel to them, but finally they're the ones that are going to have to wrestle with that in their local communities as they work through the word with those individuals. Okay. So here you see an example of teaching happening by a One Africa team member to a group of men in the classroom. The world missions approach. So our current philosophy of missions equals partnerships with existing national groups. Okay, with the advent of the internet, people are finding us from all over the world, from all continents. Okay, Latin America, South America, Asia, okay, Africa as well. Now some of them are just trying to milk you for money. Okay. As Howard Mulkey, One Africa team, a chair said, it's like prospecting for gold. When all these requests come in, you shovel a lot of gravel before you find anything. So that's where they have to be wary of those who really aren't interested in confessional Lutheran theology. Okay, so they work through them, but they want to connect with existing national groups. All right, and then there's a large number of requests from those national churches across Africa. The challenge can be getting into some of those areas, like Congo. You've got Nigeria, where there's some civil war things happening there. There's the French speakers and the English speakers. They don't like each other, and if they happen to think you're on the side of the French speakers and you're in the English zone, that it may not go well for you. So they have to consider their personal safety as they try to connect with individuals in those countries. And then the Missionary Corps works in pairs for safety and joint assessments, so they don't go alone. So if you're a missionary and you're traveling alone and you become gravely ill, who's going to look out for you, right? You need to have someone there to help you out in time of emergency. And also an extra set of ears and eyes and another mind to help with assessing what they're hearing and seeing from church groups and leaders. So sometimes a church group, will put on their best face, but this is who we are. But if you get out into their actual various churches, no, what they're describing isn't a reality. Okay, so to be able to split up a little bit while you're actually there and get into a few different local churches, and then assess, where they really are with their theology and their intentions of being, a confessional Lutheran church. And then adjunct teachers from the U.S. are now pairing up frequently with One Africa Team missionaries, and that's to double the number of visits they can accomplish. So, there are 8 missionaries for the continent of Africa, and they have dozens of requests, to assist, church bodies in a variety of nations. And it's not just, visit them once. You establish contact, and usually there's some email and conversations that might happen remotely before you actually go and visit, okay? But, visiting takes time, and they have families too, so they can't just be on the road for 2 months straight, or the spouses and the children, need father at home too, right? So to try to balance that those callings that the missionaries have as husbands and fathers with the gospel ministry is an important thing too. So this allows them to basically double, the reach that they have. And what it does is it strengthens the mission connection with WELS congregations and mission fields, right? So I can come back and share with you my experiences in world missions. So I'm just going to pause here for a little bit. Any comments or questions on the approach that I just described? Okay, then moving on. One Africa Team, 8 missionaries, and there's one multi-language productions missionary based in Zambia that oversees the Tell Africa program. So the Tell program is a program that is web-based, so people can access it. There's information about the WELS, confessional Lutheranism, and then there's coursework that people can work through. Okay, so he's doing that, what I would call digital work, working the digital domain. And then he'll pass things on to the missionaries sometimes, and then the missionaries will ask him to develop some things that they can use to work remotely with some of the people that, for example, are gathering for classwork. So there will be times if the infrastructure is there where they'll do a video call and a video class with some of the pastors that have gathered in certain areas. So again, leveraging technology to help serve the spread of the gospel. Okay, here's where we have individual church bodies that are in fellowship with the WELS. So as you can see, there are the 8 churches there, or 8 countries. So Cameroon, Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, Tanzania. So we say Tanzania. In Africa, they call it Tanzania, okay? Uganda, and then Zambia. And then we currently are working with groups and exploring outreach and following up on promising contacts identified through TEL, and that adds up to about 20 additional African countries, okay? All right, so I have done some work in Liberia, working with Dan Kroll, and so that's a country of 5.4 million residents. It's just above the equator, and who knows the history for Liberia? What do you notice about the flag? It kind of looks like ours, right? And the capital city is Monrovia. President Monroe, right? Their second leading city is called Buchanan. So Liberia was established when the United States sent a number of African slaves back to Africa. Okay, they freed them and said, go back to Africa. It's a gesture of goodwill. And they went in to set up their own nation that was modeled after the United States. Okay, and that's where you get Monrovia, that's where you get Buchanan. Now, in the recent history in Liberia, if you go back 30 years, there was a devastating civil war that destroyed much of the infrastructure that was there. It was a third world country then, and it just took it from not so good to really bad, all right? And they still haven't fully recovered. And where it really hurt them was in the education side of things. Schools were demolished. A lot of teachers, those who were educators, were killed. Okay, even a lot of clergy were killed. Okay, there were massacres in churches. So As a result, you have a generation of people that can't read. And so now you have pastors of churches who are illiterate. How do you work with that? Right? So again, that's one of the, I'll just say, hurdles that our One Africa team has to work through. They're insisting that if someone leads a church, they really should be literate. You know, they need to be able to know the scriptures and to be able to utilize a catechism and other resources for faithfully teaching Christian doctrine. Okay, so again, Liberia official language is English, but there are 19 indigenous dialects. So a small country, but you know, it's divided in a number of ways. And Liberia, in comparison with Tanzania, is a dirty place. Plastic bags and things that just litter everywhere. Okay, and even their airport, you know, was some of the municipal airports here are much better than their main airport in Monrovia. So you land on the tarmac and you wait in the plane, and they bring one of these ladders out to the plane, and you come down the steps, and then they put you on little buses, and then they give you a ride to the terminal, right? You get to the terminal, and there's all kinds of people milling around who don't belong there, okay? You better grab your bag quick because, you know, they may be trying to sneak one away from you too. So it's a different experience than what you would have here in the United States by far. Okay, so here is a picture of some of the classroom instruction that was taking place in Liberia when I was together with Dan Kroll. So we're in the interior of the building, down below, no fans, it's tropical weather. So I was using a chalkboard, okay, and they had boxes of chalk. And so just to explain how things go, is that I was instructed and told that my materials would be printed, and there would be copies for everybody when I arrived there, and that they would limit those who were in the class to those who were literate, okay, and at least a high school diploma education. So when I arrived, neither of those things were true. So I had set up my whole curriculum based on being able to send them home with reading assignments. So they had none of the materials copied. And then many of them were illiterate. So I have this chalkboard. So how am I going to get the content out there to them? So I was literally going through a box of chalk a day. Okay, and you're dripping sweat. So I grew up on a farm, and you remember stacking hay in the haymow? You know, you get up toward the peak. That's what it was like in the room here on the right, where it was just full of people and no fans. And every time I would bend over to put something on the chalkboard down low, you know, the sweat would just rain off of my brow onto my glasses. And so they had one of these little felt bean bags that you used for erasing the chalk. You know, the dust would come out of it, and then my glasses got fogged up. And my readers, so I'm trying to use my shirt to clean them up. Well, I just smeared them. It's kind of like bugs on the windshield. We don't have enough washer fluid. It's like, okay, this is bad. But you soldier through. And then they had on the third floor of the building just like an open tin roof. Okay, that was much more comfortable. So Dan Kroll and I would swap, and we'd teach for half the day in one location, then switch to go to the other. But again, it was an opportunity to at least be able to share the gospel. And one of the things I'll even share in my sermon is that when I listened to their devotions, you know, there were 12 of them that I listened to. Only one ever mentioned Christ crucified. So the predominant theology in Liberia and much of Africa is Pentecostal, and it's prosperity gospel. Okay? And so what is the emphasis going to be?
Moralism.
Pardon me?
Moralism.
Yeah, moralism, sure. And if you're poor, who doesn't want to be healthy and wealthy, right? And even prosperity gospel is huge here in the United States too, right? And so if you want to plug into God's riches, what do you need to do? You got to live right. right? And so, yeah, moralistic, right? So it was all sanctification, okay? And so there was the one fellow who did focus on Christ crucified, and so I praised that devotion up and down. Okay, that's what you need to hear every time. And I kept telling them throughout my instruction that the foundation for Christian teaching and Christian faith is Christ crucified. Okay, that's the main thing. You can't begin anywhere else, right? And that always has to be the main thing, because otherwise you're going to lead people to despair or to Pharisaism. So again, that's typically what we ran into in Liberia. Again, what a classroom would look like. There are the whiteboards, or not whiteboards, chalkboards. And here are some of the people in Liberia. Dan Crowell's together with me on the left, and then we had a larger group picture there. In some cases, the wives would come along with the husbands, with the male pastors, which is a good thing. You know, it's good for their wives to know Christian teaching and theology, and Lutheran teaching and theology as well. And there's some of the food. So on the right in the hallway of the building, like this little alcove, they would have their charcoal cooker, see it in the middle? Okay. And then one of the bowls, they would take their cassava greens or sweet potato greens, and she had like a staff that was almost like a pistol that they would use. You think of pharmacies, right? And she would just mash it, mash it all up, and then they'd cook it over that. So rice is the staple food in Liberia. And there you see on the left side, it's kind of a greenish brown. Okay, that's cassava leaves, or either it will be that or sweet potato leaves and greens. And then there'll be a chunk of chicken in there, or fish. So it'd be the front half of the fish or the back half. Okay, and the head will be on it, and the eyes in it, and all that stuff too. So that's just, in Africa and a lot of places in the world, they don't take the heads off of fish. So you just get used to getting the whole thing coming out and looking at you. So, and they like spicy food. Mexico has nothing on their heat tolerance. So yeah, it's 95 and you're eating spicy food. So that's where I was pouring lots of water into me and not having to use the bathroom at all during the day. Okay, then the other location I did work in here most recently was in Tanzania. The Serengeti National Park is there. Also, Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest point in Africa, is located there in Tanzania. The capital city is Dar es Salaam. What does that sound like? You think of languages. Sounds Arabic, doesn't it? Yeah. And so because the Arabs did make their way down along the coast of Africa, they had tremendous influence. Dar es Salaam is the capital city, and so there's a significant percentage of Muslims that live in that city. The language that is spoken is Swahili. So, the movie Lion King, that's Swahili, Hakuna Matata, no worries, that's Swahili, okay? Simba is their word for lion, okay? All right, and so you can see, they have a flag that looks a little different than most others. Tanzania used to be a German colony until after World War I. Then the British took it over. So the German mission societies are the first ones that took the gospel to Tanzania. And when I was there, they took me to a site where there were the graves of 2 German missionaries who were martyred. There were some people from the Maasai tribe who heard that Christian missionaries had come, as they traveled 30 miles to come and end their threat to their religion and the way of life. All right, so Tanzania is blown up here. So Arusha, you see it circled there in red. That's where I served together with Ben Foxon. Okay, and there's Mount Arusha that you will see. There are a number of inactive volcanoes. So the soil is very volcanic, so very rich. And again, your you're south of the equator. I could see the Southern Cross, so the stars are all different there than what we see here. And that's a population of, the city is 535,000, so it's sprawling. Okay, there I am with Ben Foxen in the center, and then you have the man on the right. His first name is Judah. I can't pronounce his last name very well, but he is the new bishop of the church body there, AMEC, African Mission Evangelist Church, okay? And then the first person on the left of Ben Foxen in the white shirt is Peter Sharima. So he was one of the translators. Judah was a translator. And then the person on the far right is Bishop Akaya. He was the bishop until just about, I think, 8 months ago. It's time for him to retire. But Bishop Kaya is the one who really felt that Lutheranism was, I'll just put it this way. He felt that confessional Lutheranism was where their church body needed to be. Okay? He did, and they did, belong to a group that was affiliated with the ELCA. And the ELCA, you know, has shifted in so many ways. So guess what I was asked several times by pastors from AMEC? Do you have gay pastors? Because the ELCA does, okay? Africa is a continent where if you're gay, it's abhorrent. So I had a man from Nigeria at Holy Trinity that I took through BIC class. We got to the Sixth Commandment, and he said, Pastor, I don't understand America. He said, in my country, if someone is found out to be gay, they will be stoned to death in the streets. Here, they give them parades in the streets, okay? So again, the African culture has morality differences from us, okay? So again, they will, in many cases, in society, have what I would call biblical moral standards, okay? So if you would go back to where we were 100 years ago with moral standards in the U.S., that's where they are, okay? And you'll see that their churches up front are very colorful. And goats, they love goats, okay? So everywhere you go, there's goats feeding, chickens feeding, and cattle. So my first night in Arusha, I had traveled for 19 hours straight, okay, on a plane, and then we got in the car, another hour and a half travel, and we arrived there at about, must have been 11 p.m. their time. So I finally got into bed, and at 3 a.m., there was a rooster crowing on my windowsill, you know, right outside. So our host asked, you know, what we wanted for supper, and I was tempted to say, I want chicken, and I want that chicken. So, but that's how they fix their goats. They stuff their mouth with some herbs, and then they roast them. They dig a pit and throw it over charcoal and let it slow roast. And there's another example of their food. They eat a lot of beef, a lot of goat. It's like a falafel. It's almost like if you've seen potato pancakes, that's kind of what that is, but it's corn. So they grow corn year-round. So you'll see fields of corn in all stages of growth constantly. Lots of carrots, and then lots of greens as well. And then fruit that's growing everywhere. That's a pomegranate. And that's Mount Arusha. And the roads are like that. And so, you know, you're driving along, and I don't know how the suspensions on their cars hold up. They're just deep gullies. So that gravel road will get maintained maybe once or twice a year max. Okay, and it rains a lot there. You know, it's heavy rains, so you can see where it washed a little gully on the side of the road. And there you'll see cattle tethered all along the highways. That's how they mow their ditches. And that will always be a bull, a little bull calf. Okay, so I said, I see bulls only. I said, where are the cows? Oh, they're home with the women. So that's because the women milk the cows. So most of them are Holsteins. Okay, what they do is they take a cement block, the men do, and they walk to work leading their bull. Some of them will have a tether around the neck, others a ring in the nose. and they'll just drop the cement block, and they'll have 20-foot tether, and that animal can just roam that circle and graze, and they'll take them back home. And then in their markets, you see all kinds of different beans, lentils and the like. So a little bit about AMIC. So formerly a part of the ELCA, 90 plus congregations. What am I doing for time? About 5,000 souls are connected with the church body. It does not have its own pastor training system. And this is problematic for many church bodies in Africa. So for their pastors to receive theological training, they either have to go to like Presbyterian seminaries, or some of them in AMIC went to Pentecostal seminaries, right? So when I did teaching with Ben Foxon, I did a review of some of the basics of the catechism. We got into baptism, and they weren't all aligned on it. So I had to back up to get to some foundational teachings, such as original sin. Why do babies need to be baptized? Because they inherit the guilt of Adam, right? Their own parents, right? Adam condemned them. He condemned us all when he sinned. We've inherited that. Then we have our own on top of it, right? Our hearts aren't neutral. So we listed all those passages, okay? And then I even used a visual. And now mind you, I'm working through an interpreter, but they drink tea left and right there. So they had tea, and they had a white napkin. And I said, when God created human nature, this is the way it was, right? In Eden, pure white, no sin. But after the fall, then I took that napkin and I dipped it into the tea, and then it turned it a different color, and it was just dripping. And I said, what do you notice about this napkin? Is there anything pure in it anymore? No. I said, how much of it is soaked with tea? All of it. So that's the picture of the human nature after the fall. It has been thoroughly soaked with sin. It's dripping with it. And then you can see the light bulbs go on as we went through the passages, right? Now let's go back to baptism. Okay. So those were just some of the ways that we had to progress with this church group. And then many pastors, as I said, trained in Presbyterian Pentecostal seminaries, they're seeking WELS assistance for developing a Lutheran confession of faith and establishing a pastor training program. So One Africa team is setting up oftentimes regional seminary programs. So, for example, Swahili is kind of a language all its own, but when you get up into Uganda, Kenya, those are Bantu languages, okay? So they try to get people of the same language groups together to do, their teaching. So Uganda is English speaking, Kenya is too, but when you get to Tanzania, that's, it's rare to find English speakers there, okay? So as a result, there's a deep need for training their own pastors so they don't have that issue of inculcation of unscriptural theology. All right, so they're in stage 2. They were in stage 2 of the 4-stage process. I forgot to update that. I thought I updated that one. They're in stage 4 at this point. They were going to be accepted into fellowship with the WELS this past July, but Bishop Judah realized that not all the pastors in AMIC were clear with Lutheran theology and fully united with their confession of faith. So let's pump the brakes before establishing formal fellowship with the WELS, and let's circle back and make sure that everyone is on board and united in a common confession of faith. And there's Ben and myself. So a little story about Ben. He had all of his teaching materials and his clothes in a suitcase, big suitcase. But when he arrived at the airport, his baggage wasn't there. And they said, we'll send it on, we'll send it on. Well, 1 day passed, 2 days passed, 3 days passed, 4 days passed, and he's wearing the same clothes. So, and it's hot there. It's tropical too. So finally, I had offered him, I said, hey, if you want, because we're about the same size, and I said, if you want to borrow a shirt or two, he kept saying, no, no, no. Finally, I said, yeah, I insist. Borrow one of my shirts. And he was happy to take it too. And there's a picture of one of the church signs out front. And that's one of their buildings. Most of the construction is done by themselves. You'll see that they have quarries right outside, like this church. There was this big hole in the ground. And you see all this volcanic rock down in there. And I didn't know, it looked like a sinkhole almost. But that's where they get their building materials for, they're going to build a new fellowship hall area, gathering space. And the young men would come when they had time, and they'd chop out chunks of stone, and then they'd add a little bit more to the wall. And then once the wall is built, they plaster it. So you see those walls? There's actually stones inside those, but then they plaster it and make it look straight. Okay, and it's all steel roofing on top. So when it rains and you're teaching, you've been in the pole shed, when the rain hits, but real good acoustics. And there's the group that had gathered for the teaching that we provided to them. And there you'll see this was their opening worship service. And remember, here in the U.S., the old Germans would sit the men on one side and the women on the other. That's what they do there too. All the men on the left side, as you can see, all the women on the right side. And then the bishop's introducing us. And there you see some of their stained glass windows. And they had a little balcony up there, some offices. And there's the quarried stones. See, they had it all piled up. I'm sorry, I'm in your way. And that's the hole they were digging them out of. And then back, you can see where they started the foundation wall, just going up. And that's a picture of me while I was doing the instruction. So they had a chalkboard, but then we were using flip chart. And this is my first time really working exclusively with a translator. And that's a different experience because it really slows down your progress with the group. And the other thing was I would maybe say something that was 12 words in length, and the translator would spend a minute talking. It's like, okay, what are you saying? So. And there's Ben Foxon with his translator. I don't know if it'll play a hymn sing here. I don't think that transferred. So, but I did have some recordings of, there it is. Okay, so they would be waiting for the time for classes to start, and one of them would just start out singing a hymn, and they would all join in with it, and then they knew these hymns by memory. Let's see here, let's move on. I've got. Pardon me? Is there much persecution? So he asked if there's much persecution of Christians in Tanzania. Depends on where you live. Now, if you're in the group where the Maasai live, okay, that's a culture where they walk around with their machetes and they're legally able to do that. So when I was in Arusha, there's a guy wearing this colorful tribal garb, this robe and everything. He had this big long machete in his sheath, right? And they're allowed to do that because that's part of their culture. But in some of those areas, there is persecution, especially for those who would depart from the family religion, yeah. And so here's the outside of one of the churches where we observed worship. I don't know if this one's going to play. We'll see. This is a movie. So this is their choir. And so the choir would sit over on the side, and as they're coming over to set up to sing their main song, they'll sing they call it a marching song, a song to get into place. There it goes. So they don't like to stand still when they sing. There you go. Small sample of that. And here too, I don't know if the audio will come through. There. So at the end of church, the choir sings while you exit, and then the choir follows you out. And so this is after we've exited the church. Okay. The audio is a little short-handed here. So I should go back. So did you see that person walk through the middle and come down? So what a number of them do is people will bring something they made at home or some garden products and things like that to church, and then at the end of the service, they auction them off. So there'll be a gal who comes through the middle. And so they auction them off, and then that goes to support the poor in the area, those proceeds. So there she comes. So she's got several bags that are filled with different things. So. All right, so some specific issues that AMIC had to address. And when I was meeting with Ben Foxon, they were going to list some of the issues that were going to require formal statements from them regarding doctrine, okay, and practice. So here would be to develop a confession of faith addressing issues in their location and culture, which include fasting. So again, if you come from a Pentecostal background, what do they say? If you want to be able to receive power from God, you have to go through prayer and fasting, okay? Pentecostalism, speaking in tongues, faith healing, the mode of baptism, social gospel, triumphalism, those are rampant in Tanzania. Polygamy is an issue. Appropriate dress for worship even. Gee, we had that issue here sometimes. So. Fellowship principles. And then, their next steps were to develop a confession of faith at the time I was there, addressing issues in their location and culture. Ordination was an issue, okay? The title of bishop versus president for a church body leader. Why do you think they avoid the term president? Yeah, that sounds civil, okay? So that's what you call someone who's in civil service, all right? So they want to maintain that separation of church and state. This is not a civil ruler. We don't call him president, we call him bishop. You and I, when we hear bishop, what do we think? Catholic, yeah. So funerals for inactive members, that one came up. Now, some of these we said you probably don't need to put this into a confessional statement. You just need to have some pastoral letters that you draft to submit and make available to other pastors. The use of alcohol. So throughout Africa, there are many cultures who have been taught, due to Pentecostalism and some other faith communities who go beyond Scripture, they've been taught that any use of alcohol is sinful. Okay? So now, if a congregation has been taught that for years, and you want to bring alcoholic wine to them, what are they thinking? Yeah. So the very thing that God has given to quiet the conscience, right? To soothe the conscience is now pricking their conscience. So there's going to need to be very patient instruction, right? And not everyone may be ready to take alcoholic wine at the same time, right? Because in their hearts, if it's sin, then for them it is sin. Yeah. So I pray for those pastors who are trying to work through that with their members. And then the confessional statement here has been approved by OAT. And so they're, again, working to try to make sure that everyone is on board with it and adopts it. So questions? We've got a few minutes left here, 5 before 10. Yeah. They do. Yep. They have a Lutheran hymn book. It looks very similar to ours as far as how it's laid out, with the notation and the words. Yeah. And they have some parts of the catechism in it as well. Yep.
What's the question about ordination? What was that they were working on?
So there were a couple of aspects with ordination, right? So first of all, is ordination necessary for someone to preside over the sacrament? That's part of it, right? And then secondly, is ordination necessary for just good order in the church? So that we are acknowledging people as qualified for ministry. Okay. So in those areas, many of them, by necessity, were served by unordained people for lengthy amounts of time. Okay? So, and when you don't have your own worker training system, and it costs money to send a young man from your local congregation that's kind of out hundreds of miles from all the others, to a seminary, who's going to foot that bill? Okay, so they have a local resident man who they trust as an elder, who they feel is knowledgeable in the word, and he serves as pastor, but he's not ordained. Okay, so again, how do you develop a core of gospel ministers who have been thoroughly, if you want to call it vetted, right? Where we understand that they do understand the deep truths of Scripture, that they do have the ability to teach it, right? And they have the character then that is suitable and required for ministry, okay? So all those need to come into play. And one thing I will say here is the more I've experienced what other church bodies are facing in the world with training of pastors, the more I appreciate what we have in the Wells for our worker training system, brothers and sisters. When you receive a call list, when you were calling before Pastor Berg accepted, you could be confident that all of these men were going to be faithful to the teachings of Scripture, all of them, that they were going to hold to the Lutheran confessions, that they had been instructed, that they had demonstrated that they were apt to teach, that demonstrated Christian character that would serve as a good example for their flock and for the community. Okay, what a blessing we have in our synod to have such a solid worker training program for pastors, teachers, and staff ministers. And I think sometimes we take that for granted, and it is worth supporting. Not only with our dollars, but then also sending our young men and women to prepare for ministry as well. Yes?
In either one of these countries or both of them, is there much government restrictions?
Okay. So she asked about government restrictions in either country. So in Liberia, in order to have a church, you're supposed to be registered with the government. Like for example, if we want to set up a 501c3, you have to go through process. So that you just can't set something up without filing the proper paperwork. But there aren't a lot of restrictions in those two countries. Now, when you get into some of the other areas like Cameroon, when you get into, for example, they're trying to get into Congo and do more work there. there's more government interference there, especially where there's what I would say a high proportion of Islam. Okay, they will actively persecute Christians, yeah, and Christian missionaries. And you may have heard of Boko Haram. You know, they've burned thousands of churches and killed hundreds of thousands of Christians. Anyone else? Okay, tell you a little story. So the first time I went to Liberia, I was on the plane back, and there were all kinds of Africans on the plane with me wearing these little badges that said they were part of the Methodist convention, worldwide convention, and then they were delegates to it, okay? And if you remember, they met in the Twin Cities, and it was the African delegation that shut down their vote to allow gay clergy. Okay? And because so many Western churches have gone into the gutter morally, you know, whether it's, they don't even know what a woman is anymore, right? In some of these cases, and then homosexuality and the like. So, on those, because of those moral, that moral drift, for them, that's just intolerable, right? We need to find a different affiliation. So, yeah, and so when I came back from Liberia, there was one of the men that was on the plane with me that ended up going around through the baggage line, and we picked up our baggage, and it was February, and we were in one of our coldest naps of the year, and so you have the double set of doors at the airport. And so I went in and we were waiting in the little vestibule there and for our rides to come. And one of the men who was from Africa just comes striding through with his suitcases through the first door and out the second one. And he gets outside and, you know, he's just, and he comes back, "What's wrong with the outside?" You know, "Welcome to Minnesota." You know, it's just... You know, just like, you know, when a baby gets wind blowing in his face, that's just what he did. He was like, oh, you know. So again, what I'm describing here as taking place in Africa is really taking place in maybe not exactly the same form, but in similar formats throughout the world on the part of the Wells. And one thing you will notice even in the third world countries, everybody has one of these. So you wonder where your iPhone 10 goes? It goes there. You know, those kind of places. And they're all on WhatsApp, okay? And because electricity is sparse, if there's an outlet somewhere, there's a line of people waiting to plug in their phone to charge, yeah. So they are very well connected.
What is your responsibility with one African team? Are you still helping out with that? How do we think about that?
I was asked to go back to Liberia with Dan Kroll, but it didn't work out. That was last year. So someone else went, Paul Hirsch, excuse me, went. So I don't know when the next opportunity will come. Because of my district president duties, it has to mesh, you know, with those responsibilities. Because typically they want you to go for 2 weeks, because it costs a lot to send you there. So, you know, go and stay for a while and be a good steward of that travel cost and time. Yes? Yeah, so he asked, who does the translating for the TEL network? So there are some cases where we know of people who understand Lutheran theology well, who are able to partner with translating. Now, AI is producing translators that are actually quite good. Now, for example, I've been teaching PSI to a Hmong man. Now, the Hmong translator is bad, you know, that's not so good. But he knows Thai, and that is quite good in translating. So we're able to use some of those at this time. And you know, it's never going to be perfect with it, right? But it's better than nothing. And so that's what they're able to work with. Correct. Yep. AI is able to go in and search, you know, usages so quickly now, right? How is this term used or communicated in different contexts and languages? Yeah. I don't have that number. I tried to look it up before I came to do the presentation. I couldn't find it. So, and I think in some cases they're going to keep that information private, just in case, you know, there are some people who want to persecute them where they are. Yeah. When I was in Liberia, and just so you appreciate again the blessings we have in a country with law and order, I was teaching stewardship, and after I'd gone through and kept, you know, hitting on, you know, the need for gospel motivation, and I asked them, what do you feel is the biggest hurdle among your people for gospel motivated stewardship? Guess what they told me? The money that is given will be stolen or misused. Because the people in charge of the money just do whatever they want with it. And I said, well, what about putting it in a bank? Well, if you put it in a local bank in some of these small communities, you'll go back and the bank will say, we don't have your money anymore. So what do? Right? You either let somebody keep it in their house, which they can just dip into at any time, or you deposit it in a bank and the bank says, nah, we can't back the money anymore. It's gone. So either way, they lose. So people then are very hesitant to support financially the work of the church. So almost all their pastors are tent ministers. They don't get paid. Yeah. So you can imagine now, they're working full-time jobs and then trying to do ministry on top of it, and they've got, in some cases, congregations with members in the hundreds. And you know how busy it is to keep up with a few hundred souls, you know. So the shepherding is suffering as a result of that, okay? So how blessed we are to have full-time gospel ministers who have been faithfully trained. Yeah. Anyone else? If any questions come to mind later on, feel free to come up and ask. Thanks for the opportunity to share. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll take a few minutes here, and you'll join us back, so if you have questions, you can keep asking. We'll start worship about 10:30, okay? So just be aware of that. We have a few minutes here, so converse if you like.